there have been scuffles inside the Georgian parliament, which has voted through a law that would force civil society groups and media organizations to declare foreign funding. At one stage today, governing party MPs took umbrage at an opposition deputy who accused the authorities of selling Georgia out to Russia. They rushed to him with one hurling a bottle. Outside, crowds were chanting and waving EU flags in a final attempt to stop the bill, which they say threatens civil liberties and could derail Georgia's progress to EU membership. But the vote went ahead regardless, in spite of the protests from citizens and the criticism that's been coming from Georgia's Western partners. Heavy police reinforcements guarded the entrance to the parliament building. Well, for one of those stories, I'm joined now on the line from London by Arise Eastern European analyst, Dr. Marek Lazkeiwicz. Dr. Lazkeiwicz, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's start with that visit of Antony Blinken to Kyiv. He said he's giving reassurance. So is it just warm words, or can a visit like this actually achieve something?
Oh, the visit is very important, because it shows Ukraine has not been left to its own devices, that America is standing by it. The key question, of course, is how quickly America can do something. And this hinges upon how well one can say that Ukraine fights back. What is happening is Russia is having successes, and it's almost, if you like, a question whether they can take a town like Kharkiv before the Americans arrive in force with their weapons. In my opinion, I don't think Russia is strong enough to take Kharkiv with as quickly as it might do, because I think the American military is making the supplies relatively quickly available. However, unquestionably, some Russian advances are still to be expected in the near future.
Well, hopefully we'll have time to talk a little bit about what's happening on the ground in that Kharkiv region. But I imagine that the political paralysis in Washington for many months over Ukraine must have really damaged Ukrainian morale, as well as obviously impeding the supply of weapons.
Yes, in both counts you are quite right. First of all, Ukrainian morale has been lowered by the fact it's been seen to be abandoned by the West. Secondly, it literally was running out of ammunition. The American aid has come just in the nick of time. Had there been no American aid forthcoming now, it is entirely possible that Russia could have taken Kharkiv, and possibly more than that. As it stands, more than likely a defensive line of some sort will be able to be drawn up, in which case the Ukrainians will be able to keep on to Kharkiv. What is also important in this visit is that America has made a personal gesture to show that it stands by Ukraine, which is, of course, going to be very warmly appreciated by many Ukrainians.
But of course, Dr. Lazkeiwicz, in terms of the details of his talk with Antony Blinken, I mean, President Zelensky, we probably won't know about that, will we, unless you've got ears inside the room where they were meeting, because I know you've got ears in a lot of places.
Indeed. However, there is one downside to this which must be mentioned. Because America is now standing by Ukraine, the chances of any sort of peace deal have more or less evaporated, whereas Ukraine might well have been prepared to consider some territorial concessions. No such possibility exists for the moment. And this means the war is likely to drag on for some time, which is one downside. But the upside is, of course, the Ukrainian won't be conquered, but the war will carry on. And here lies the problem. Wars are unpredictable, can escalate, can expand, but hopefully this war won't.
Indeed. But can we assume, because you mentioned the speed of the arrival of weapons, can we assume that a lot of US weapons would have possibly been pre-positioned in presumably a country like Poland, which you're well familiar with, before the US Congress passed that big aid bill about 3 weeks ago? Because some of those, as you said, are already getting through to Ukraine.
Yes, indeed. I would imagine that the US government was, how can I put it, pushing its legality to the limits by keeping the arms as closely as possible to Ukraine so it could supply it. if the vote and when the vote in the Senate and went ahead and was successful. So yes, of a hefty amount of arms, and therefore I would anticipate that, of course, not all were kept in Poland under wraps, but certainly some immediate contingent, yes.
Well, I did mention, Dr. Lazkeiwicz, that you've got eyes and ears in a lot of places. So let's turn to Georgia, where protests there against a bill that would force civil society groups and media organizations to declare foreign funding have reached a climax after the bill was voted through by Parliament. So the protests have essentially come to naught, although I understand the protesters are still there.
Oh, yes, the protesters will carry on because now it's an emotional matter as much as a political one. And in fact, there will be problems in, of course, enforcing this law for some time. However, the problem is that the government would appear to know what it's doing very well and will take action almost immediately against some groups, some organizations that it wishes to suppress, and that therefore, slowly but surely, there will indeed be a suppression of freedom in Georgia. What is interesting and what still remains possible is that owing to the amount of civil unrest, it won't be as widespread and as total a law as the authorities might like. And therefore, in this respect, the protests have not been probably without some success, albeit limited, albeit that it won't stop the law going ahead.
Talking about success, the bill, I'm told, now goes to the Georgian president for assent. She has the power to veto it, will she?
I shouldn't think the protests are that strong that she'd be that worried to veto it as a result. I believe personally that the laws sooner or later will arise because the state and so many people in the state, and obviously some Georgians as well, wanted to go ahead. What is the point is whether or not it can be limited in its scope. But I don't think it will be stopped at any place, no.
Dr. Marek Lazkeiwicz, we really appreciate your talking with us. Very great experience and knowledge of that region that you've got. Dr. Marek Lazkeiwicz is a RISE Eastern European analyst. He was talking to me there on the line from London.